This story is 100% true, and I even left in the parts that I didn't really want to admit to. I depict violence in this story, so if you have trouble with that, you might not want to read this. I don't know if this story will fit proper in this subreddit, nor if anyone will like it. It is not a story of me at my best, but it is revenge. I was 18 years old in 2001 and just started getting into the party scene. I liked the drugs, I liked the dance music. I'm an introvert, and I was trying to become social. During this time, I met some friends. John became my best friend for a decade, and Brian. At the time, I had just totaled my car, so John would drive for me, and we did everything together. He liked the same sports as me, was very giving, and was down to do all the crazy shit that I would impulsively want to do. As a thanks for him being such a good friend, I would pay for gas and drugs. At the time I was dealing cocaine and ecstasy, not major dealing, but I usually had drugs, and John would never pay for what I gave him. Brian was a rave child, already pretty burned out from drugs, but he was a lot of fun, knew lots of people, introduced me to the rave scene. Now I worked and was dealing on the side, so I had okay money. I would start paying for Brian to get into clubs and for drugs sometimes. He was kind of a mooch though, so I started cutting him off. Then things started going missing. He stole my expensive sunglasses, he stole drugs, and money from me. He stole from other dealers, and there were people looking for him. I finally cut him out of my life when he stole some ecstasy from me and fed it to a girl so he could fuck her. Now this girl and I had already hung out 2 weeks, and we made out, but I'm slow to make moves. I'm an introvert, and don't have many relationships, and Brian had a beautiful girlfriend who was a part of our friend group, and pulls this shit. A couple weeks later I see his girlfriend at the bank, and say, fuck Brian, and just so you know, he cheated on you. And quat. She came over to my house to talk about it, and later that night she and I hooked up. I guess it was a revenge fuck for her to get back at Brian. I was hoping it would be more than that. Something like a month later I get a call from Brian saying he heard I'm selling some ecstasy and acid, and says he wants to buy it. The whole phone call felt off, and was pretty sure something was up. I told him to come stop by to get it. John was with me and had a .45 in his truck. I told him to go get it since this felt off. He grabbed it and stuffed it in his waistband, and we waited for Brian to show up. Brian shows up with 2 friends, we talk a little bit, he hands me some money for the drugs, I hand him the drugs. Then he brings up he heard I slept with his girlfriend. I told him if he wants to talk about this or handle it, let's go over here and handle it. Just then, one friend tackles John to the ground, the other pins me. John is fighting the other guy, while my arms are pinned behind me and Brian is punching and kicking me in the face. I had some earrings, and he rips them out of my ears. He then steals the rest of the drugs I had on me, but leaves the money he just gave me for the drugs he paid for. Fucking idiot. And all 3 of them take off running. I go to pull the .45 from John's waistband, but he blocks me from grabbing it and tells me it's not worth it. I find out the next day that the whole reason Brian did that was for a quick fix before he left town. That night he was on his way across the country to live with his sister. I was livid. I thought about finding out where he was living and driving there myself with my .38 special. I was so angry it was affecting my sleep and all my waking moments. For months and months this went on. 10 months later, I'm at a friend's house when there is a knock on the door. I turn around as the door opens, and it's Brian. He says, "Is Michael here?" And quat. Then noticed me and says, "Never mind." And quat. Slams the door and runs. I find out that he burned all his bridges at his sister's house, and had to move back with his parents. A week later I go to my friend's house and have him call Brian over. John talked me into leaving my gun in the car. He had a small bat to regulate with, but I told him this was between Brian and I, and told him to stay back unless things go bad for me. Did some coke, gave John some coke, and we were ready to go. The house had a 20-feet walkway to it with railings, and a car was parked at end of it, and had tinted windows. We waited in the car until Brian walked up to the door, then I charged out of the car and run at him as fast as I can. "Oh shit." Brian said. "Oh shit is right," I said as I smashed him as hard as I could in the face. We fought for a minute, while John stood at the end of the walkway with the bat in his hand. Brian had one good punch on me that I ended up chipping a tooth from. The cocaine made me bite down too hard when he hit me. He then made a run for John, and punches him in the face. John wasn't having that, so he pulled out the bat, and started beating him. Brian fights him for the bat, but John is stronger and rips it out of his hands and passes it to me. I started beating him with the bat as he fought John. I'll give Brian credit though, I told him to lay down and this will go a lot easier, but he stayed up fighting the whole time. I started wailing into his back and head, and could see the bruises appear on his back as soon as I hit him. He finally went down when I cracked him in the head, and fractured his skull. And then once he went down, John punted his head like a 50-yard field goal. Brian was done. As he is bleeding on the porch, Brian then asks me if we can be friends again since we are even. I was like, what the fuck? No. He then asks what he has to do so he can leave. I told him to leave his clothes, and walk home. You want my clothes ? And quat. No, I want you to leave them here, and go. And quat. He stripped to his boxers and walked home on a cold October with snow on the ground. Well, I thought we were dealing with this like they do on the streets. He robs me and beats me, so I beat the fuck out of him. But no, he goes home to his parents' house, and then calls the cops on me. So the cops came and arrested John and I. So, I took as much of the blame as I could so John wouldn't go to jail for as long as I did, but he did end up doing some time. I hate jail and prisons, but that night I was able to sleep knowing Brian was sleeping in the hospital. This story is 20 years old now. Since then, I've never had another friend that takes advantage of me. Brian was the one who taught me a valuable lesson. Don't invite people like that into your life. I dealt with a lot of anger issues back then, but I've never beat another person like this again, and I've learned how to handle anger better. I honestly don't like fighting, but I was so good to this friend who just kept taking, and then mugs me. I no longer deal drugs or use them, except for smoking weed. Doesn't stop me from fucking up still though, since this wasn't the last time I was arrested.